There it is. Okay, so we're going to talk about Mod 4 project, right? And so, and talk about timeline, a little bit like what it is. This is kind of in general, like you can think of this project as kind of like your baby capstone or practice for your capstone. Um, it, I will say it's not necessarily, you don't necessarily have to go with, how do I say this? The curriculum says something about like saying, oh, you could take this project and turn it into your capstone. I don't think that's necessary. I know a lot of people end up doing that direction, but don't feel like what you do for your Mod 4 project has to turn into your capstone. Okay, I just want to make that super clear. All right. So let's go ahead and share screens. And while I'm kind of sharing the screen, give me a thumbs up. Who's looked at the Mod 4 project like README that's on Learn? Okay, I see some thumbs up. Cool, that's good. And if you haven't yet, don't worry, but I highly recommend making sure you guys actually read through it. The main thing about it is that it's kind of similar to your Mod 3 project that you have a machine learning part. I think, did Mod 3, you guys chose your own data set, right? Yeah, so this is gonna be a little bit different. Like you still get to choose, but it's recommended that you choose of these 4 different data set directions. And this is kind of like, you think of it like your elective project. So it's like you can decide what thing sounds interesting to you or what sounds closer to your industry or something along those lines. Like for example, time series. If you're looking to go into finance, time series can be super important. If you're looking to do anything like with like natural language processing, you might want to do a natural language processing project. If you already have an idea for your capstone or like a rough idea, think about like, if you can think about like which one of these 4 areas might encompass or at least match better with your capstone, then I would say try to go with that direction. But if you're not sure, you can also just try this out. And again, people also put this in for your portfolio too. So some people like to have it more like the breadth, right? Others think, oh, let me just have something that's different. So I have kind of like covered my bases. If that's the case, 2 things I would recommend if you're looking more for breadth in like a specific direction, I would actually say NLP stuff and or recommendation system. Is probably those 2 really just like encompass a lot of things that just like aren't always seen all the time. Image classification, which is really cool and everything like that. I don't think it's necessary for most data science positions. There's a lot of skill level to do image classification and there's a lot of like real value to it. But if you're looking more for breadth, I would actually recommend doing one of these 2. And mostly because also NLP is like a lot of information dense material, similar to like an image thing. And recommendation systems, I mean, recommendation systems can be developed for a lot of different, you know, like business practices, business problems and such. Okay. Not to harp on time series. I'm just not super, I'm not a big time series person, so maybe that's a little bit of my bias in here, but note that people also do time series in here. But anyway, that's kind of like the idea. You're gonna pick one of these 4 topics, right? And you're gonna go in this direction, deciding how you wanna do this. If you want advice, you can definitely talk with me, right? Talk with each other. We can say like, you know, what direction you wanna go into. There are 4 different data sets. So if you choose the time series model, we actually have data from Zillow essentially with various zip codes. This, I will tell you, can be a lot of data. A big thing about this project right here is going to, if you go in this direction, is just making sure you pull the relevant data that you want. You can try pulling all of the data in there, but just know that you kind of have to like think about how you're going to process that information and stuff like that. So you'll see what I mean if you go in that direction, if you're exploring it. If you go into recommendation systems, we have another data set right here with from Movies Lens. It's about 100,000 user ratings and such. So you can go through there. I think we didn't talk about it while I was here, but collaborative filtering was talked about. I think, was it Mod 3? You guys talked about recommendation systems, or was it? No, it was in Mod 4, isn't it? I think, is that right? Yeah, it's like the PiSpark area. Okay, so that'd be there. Note that for these projects, you don't have to use PiSpark. I don't expect you guys to use PiSpark. I don't even expect you guys to use PiSpark for your capstone unless you want to do it. It's just that it's usually not necessary. And I think it ends up adding just extra roadblocks compared to just doing what you need to do. But you can talk to me if you really want to do a PiSpark, or when we go into detail, we can talk about that. All right. And then the third problem, image classification. There's a Kaggle data set here. Basically, they have X-ray data and basically saying if the person has pneumonia. I think there's actually more than one class of disease on the data set, but I think the main idea is like, does this person have pneumonia or not? And for this one, like they mentioned, it's like, because this can be kind of a tough thing, this data set might not be large enough. in a lot of ways is that just know you really want to aim for a proof of concept versus like a full-fledged, like fully working, like if you're like, oh man, I want to get like a 90%, accuracy or something like that, don't stress out about that. If you want to do kind of that direction, um, think of this as kind of a practice time to like check out image classification. And if you want to go more into that in your capstone, you can really focus on like what details you need to do and other data augmentation and other strategies you can have. And then the fourth one is the NLP data set, which is basically from, let's hear, yeah, it's basically tweets, right? And essentially it's a sentiment of saying like use a positive, negative, or, neither, neutral, right? And so this is a really interesting, this is one of the examples for NLP. If you want to do NLP, like, so this is kind of a suggestion from the curriculum, I would say is that 95% of the time, if you, like sometimes people say, oh, I want to do something different or slightly different. I'm gonna say 95% of the time, I'm gonna say, just follow along this way, and not like to stifle your creativity, but you can use that essentially. It's like, well, maybe we can do this for capstone, and that's where you can really expand outwards. So I'll say like for NLP, for example, there's so much more than just sentiment. There's so many interesting things you can do with natural language processing. But in this case, I would say try to focus on what the curriculum is trying to guide you towards, just because you can go in some deep rabbit holes and like, this being your Mod 4 project, you still got your capstone up. So I'd rather you spend that time in the rabbit holes, at least a little bit more time in your capstone versus in your Mod 4 project. Okay. Sound pretty good? Yeah. All right. Typical stuff. I note that I think, if I remember this in the Mod 4 project, no, okay, it's the capstone thing. I thought there was a different thing I had to tell you, but don't worry. The typical stuff, you need your Jupyter notebook, your technical notebook, right? Making sure you have your README file. Basically, it's kind of like a summation, a quick like synopsis of like your full technical notebook. Your blog post, just like every project, there's a blog post associated with your project, right? And then your, I don't call it an executive summary, but using your PowerPoint presentation or just your presentation. I don't like using brands. Okay, not PowerPoint, it doesn't have to be PowerPoint. In fact, I don't want you guys to use PowerPoint. You can use PowerPoint. But do a presentation that's gonna be non-technical, that's geared towards that audience versus someone who's like fully enwrapped in data science and stuff. And I think that can be the toughest one, especially when you're doing like higher level machine learning stuff. That can be tough to make sure, like, how do you make sure you convey the important information versus just like what you did? Because that's going to be something like what you found really interesting in this project. Like if you do something like convolutional neural nets and you're going through, it's like, oh, this was really interesting. That might be too much detail that someone really doesn't care about if they're just thinking about what's the business application, like how's this work, or like what issues did you come across? What do we need to think about for the future? It definitely is a different kind of mindset. Okay, cool. And the typical like Jupyter notebook suggestions and making sure you guys have visualizations. You should, I don't even like using like, oh, like don't like, I think in the rubric it says like, oh, make sure you have visualizations. I don't know who's making no visualizations in their notebook, because you should be having those things to help summarize your information. So typical stuff. And I think we've talked about general advice way before. All of this still completely applies. It's just, and your mind should just be another project, right? And that should feel pretty typical. If possible, I think the process, yes, thank goodness they put this. Sorry, I'm talking to myself a little bit because I'm like, this wasn't here before, and I said, you really should have a process in here. So really try to stick to like, like a framework, like, CrisDM or Awesome to help organize your work. That's gonna really help for you like do the project, but also for future projects, especially the one that's coming up in the capstone. Like you really should be using a framework. That way you can organize your thoughts, organize your kind of process forward. That's kind of like the idea here. Okay. So that's overall really like I think for the most part, I think you guys, once you have the data set and what your problem's gonna, like business problem gonna be, you probably already have an idea of what you'll do, like in what direction you'll do. Maybe not the full details, but like, the data preparation, data cleaning, making sure your data is all put together, your modeling stuff, your evaluation, note the deployment. Deployment is like, I think that might be a little weighted. I don't know, weight is the right word, but like deployment doesn't literally mean you have to have this model deployed. I don't know if we've talked about what deployment means. Yeah, okay, see some head shakes. So deployment in this case is basically saying like, what is the overall, like when you're like actually done with your project, what does this mean for your stakeholders? Like, what is the like what do you do with this information? And part of deployment in this way, you can think of like, you know, what can we do further for future research, or how can we use this? Like, for example, if you have image recognition, for example, how would you use this image recognition tool now in a business setting, you know, or, you know, like in business, again, I say business, it doesn't have to be literally a business, but your stakeholders. Okay. Cool. Any questions? Yeah.
Yeah, I have a question. Now that you mentioned deployment, are we going to cover deployment actually of a finished product, putting it
Yeah.
on a website?
Yeah, so that's actually a really good point. It is not something that is built into the curriculum, to be quite honest. It's not like there's like, oh, here's like something to talk about deployment, but it is something that I know students have done in the past. I have some opinions on it. And the main opinion I have about it is you like, first of all, I think most people will do like a capstone. Like their capstone would be the thing that they would have a deployment, some kind of interaction. Some people make dashboards, put on a website and stuff like that. I think those are all really great. And I think it's great practice and stuff and seeing what that looks like. My opinion on it is being careful not to turn your project, your data science project, into a software engineering project. And that's the biggest issue of like why I try to like, sometimes people go really big, like, oh, I want to make this like app, like I want to build this app essentially. That's kind of like the cliche, like, oh, like I want to do this machine learning project, but then I want to build an app that's going to do all these things. I'm like, that's really cool. But like that app part makes it sound like, oh, I do all the data science stuff and I got the machine learning model and I'm just going to put it in an app. That's actually a lot of work, that section of going through there. There are some easier ways to do this, especially other tools. I know some people are familiar with Fast AI. Fast AI has a lot of like great tools to help deployment. If you're looking more for an analysis tool, Plotly, which makes this thing called Dash. Dash actually is really useful. It's actually built on top of Flask. It's all these acronyms, and not Flask acronyms, but different names. But there's actually a Flask, for example, like basically can build your stuff. The thing I just want to avoid for people is to focus on that part, because that part's the really shiny part and it looks really cool to like show people. But also it's like, to be quite honest, like, and this is where I'm going to be honest with you guys, is that it's probably not necessary when you guys get in your first data science position, because a lot of times they have different systems in different, you know, DevOps operations of like what's going to happen once you build up your model or your data science project. Like how are they going to deploy it is going to depend so much on what the company does and how they want to use it. And I don't want you guys to focus too much on one particular way of like deployment that might be more, to be honest, it might not ever come up again. But we can talk about that. Like I say, for this project, don't worry about deployment in that way, but maybe future stuff. And if you're still really interested, like, hey, I really want to make this thing, like I've seen this done or whatever. I've seen people talk about deployment. Definitely talk to me. You know, let's talk about it in one-on-one. Let's talk about it on Slack. I think there's some really cool things you can do, but my big thing for you guys is to make sure it's really easy to dive into that rabbit hole of just being like, it becomes a software engineering project. So
because Jessica looks very interested in the deployment part.
No, it's interesting. I just didn't get very much sleep last night. That's all.
Ooh, caught. All right, no worries.
No, I swear, I'm listening.
I'm gonna blame that. It's now getting warmer in the day. It's an hour and a half, right, versus the hour. You know, it's not because Victor's really boring and stuff like that.
No, I slept less than 5 hours last night, so that's why I'm.
You got a whole 5 hours, man. That's great.
Oh yeah, you're a new parent. What am I saying? It's like a luxury. And you're not even yawning. I'm impressed.
This is not my first coffee, so. All right, no worries though. But yes. So anyway, this project is kind of like it's kind of like just guiding you. Say, oh, here's 4 different projects, or 4 different data sets, 4 different projects you can do. Choosing one of them. I'll later on kind of give you guys a little bit of a due date of like saying, okay, like in this due date, it's going to be more of like an unofficial, like, hey, you should pick your project now. That way you can move into your project. It's probably gonna be closer into like next week, like maybe next week, Wednesday. That gives you enough time to kind of just at least look at the like different options and see what's interesting to you and see what direction you want to go towards. But like, if you don't like pick a day, like a project by that day, like is something bad gonna happen? No, like you might just hear more from me. Like I might bother you a little bit more. That's pretty much it. But yeah, I think this is pretty straightforward. I think this is your fourth project now. Is that right? I'm getting that right? Yeah. Module 4, fourth project. So it's your fourth project. It shouldn't feel anything like too scary. It's kind of like, I said, like in a lot of ways, like hopefully this in a lot of ways feels a little boring. It's like, oh, I'm doing another project again. Because if this idea of making a project feels kind of boring, that's a good thing, because it means that you're used to it. And like, oh good, like a project isn't this big scary thing. Like, I don't know if you guys remember Mod 1 project, like how many people like had like little anxiety of just being like, oh my gosh, it's this big project, I have to complete this. Like now you guys looking at it like, oh man, like I can do a project over 2 weeks. This is no problem. So anyway, that was me kind of introducing it. Oops, I have this tab open, but I don't need this tab open. Anyway, read this through, make sure you kind of like see what the projects are over the next week. I'll put out, we'll meet again on Thursday to talk about, NLP, but you can also ask questions about this Mod 4 project. And I'll probably put out something on Slack about something about it being due on like kind of some timeline of like kind of help you move forward. One thing to note is that kind of pulling up our calendar here on our cohort is that we're going to kind of like be starting the project now, right? Like that's kind of like the idea right here. But you have a break week, September 7th through, we come back on the 14th. And that's when we start doing Mod 4 project assessments. So you do have a little bit of a break in there. So my goal is to basically have everyone completely done with their Mod 4 project with assessments by September 18th. Basically the Friday we come back. Like the Friday after we come back. And the reason why is because then we're going to just go straight into Capstone, and there isn't any lesson material for Capstone. It's like, oh, now we start Capstone. So like you can like put off like doing Mod 4 project, like if that makes sense, like you can like wait until the very last minute to do Mod 4 project, but you're kind of hurting yourself where you could have been focusing on Capstone. So that's kind of why I'm trying to like make sure you guys get right into it. Okay. Make sense, everyone? Yeah. Cool. Any questions at all about this or how to move forward or anything like that? Yeah.
With our capstone project, is it kind of like free reign, or
yeah?
Okay, cool.
It's more free reign. Like I am an instructor that definitely is a lot more just like chill and being like, if you want to do this project and you really are dedicated to doing this, I'll let you do it. But I'll kind of give you advice and try to make sure that you don't go too deep into trying something that you like, that's going to take you a long time. I think that's sometimes a danger of when people do capstones, but in general, you basically get to pick whatever data set you want. For the record, I think you can go see the capstone. If not, I'll actually release it because I don't see why not. You can see it. I think you guys might be able to see, sorry, I have so many cohorts. I'm here. Mod 5, let's hear. If it's not released, I'll release it. Yeah, I think if you just go in right now into the Mod 5 and then go to Capstone project, you actually see like what the requirements are and stuff like this. I will tell you is that I'm even like more relaxed than what the curriculum shows. The curriculum mentions about saying, oh, it has to be a supervised learning project or something like that. Yeah, like it talks about this thing. I don't. I broke this rule pretty easily with one of the students, and it's perfectly fine. I think the main thing for your capstone, you can kind of think about it. It's an end-to-end project. It's between you defining the business problem, again, business problem, and then going into collecting the data, collecting data acquisition, where the data comes from, how are you going to use it, and then all the way into analysis, exploration, all that stuff, into modeling, and then into like a conclusion, kind of tying into like, okay, how is this useful? And that's your project for like their capstone. And just to kind of put you some framework, I know you guys talking about Mod 4 project, but to kind of think about your capstone in the future, your capstone is kind of the project that I like to say is the thing that you want to talk, like if when an interviewer or whoever asks you, tell me about a data science project you've done recently, that should be your capstone. Like that should be the thing that you're like, oh, you feel comfortable talking about, you spent time on doing it. You might not have done everything. You might not even gotten the best results. But if someone says, oh, like, did you have issues with this? You can talk about what those issues are, what you would do differently, what things might be better, and stuff like that. Like you should be familiar enough with that project where if someone asks you a question, it should take you no time to be like, oh yeah, I thought about this. Or like, I haven't thought about that, but I think it would tie in this way. that's kind of the idea of your capstone. That's at least my personal goal for you guys, is essentially to make a project that you can talk about during an interview. Make sense?
Well, yeah, totally.
Cool, yeah. And of course, we'll talk more about that in the future. All right. Cool. Yeah. Other than that, I mean, I don't really have much to talk about for the Mod4 project. Just general like advice. I think this is on the repo up on GitHub that I have, right? I think you guys have seen this before. But yeah, I think at this point, it's your 4th project. You should feel pretty good. Maybe the technical part, maybe you feel a little like not rusty, but like you need to learn a little bit on that stuff. Like maybe like, oh, I want to do NLP, but I haven't done too much NLP stuff. That's perfectly fine. But I think you guys know in general how projects would look like. Yeah. Awesome. All right. Any last questions, comments, concerns, wisdoms? All right. Well, I'll end it here then. I'll make sure the recording from the mod for stuff that we talked about is up. We'll also put up this recording here up on there so you guys can reference it in case, I don't think there's too much to reference, but it'll be there. And then just know next time, this is kind of like officially like the start of the Mod4 project. So it's like, this is like you start, all right, go look at Mod4 project, see what's in there, and kind of figure out what project you want to do. Decide sooner than later. And I'll kind of have like an unofficial due date for that. So that way you can kind of keep yourself honest and make sure you move on to the next part. But we'll go over NLP and maybe some transfer learning next, or I guess maybe a little bit of convolution and transfer learning next time. Okay. All right, everyone.